Hello, and welcome back to Deep Learning with PolyAI. Today, Nikola and I are going to be talking about effective altruism and AI, examined through the lens of the chaos over at OpenAI. For anyone that isn't familiar, effective altruism is defined as a research principle or an intellectual field that focuses on how we might do the most good for the most important problems empirically. But it's also become this philosophy that's guided many of the most prominent builders of technology today. And it may have been behind some of that tension between Sam Altman and his board that led to his eventual firing and bringing back and the board being fired. So if you think like a builder who uses effective altruism as a guiding architectural principle, um, then the core question is probably something like, who better to protect the fate of humanity from technology than those that are building it and those that actually understand it? But for those that are a little bit more cynical, effective altruism might be more like a lullaby a for-profit company would sing to the masses to kind of put you to sleep about safety and self-regulation, leaving the company without any lucid scrutiny. Um, so basically, this idea that because I'm smart, because I understand this technology, I must be smart everywhere. Who better than me to save the world? Uh, so
Garbage.
the I could get even more cynical, but we'll keep it there. But the recent events, I think, at OpenAI beg questions about nonprofits and for-profits coexisting, AI regulation, the scale of SAMs from Bankman-Fried to Altman, and then the role of startups to really continue to push barriers, and perhaps the role of governments and smart people to stop them from going too far. So let's talk about it. Nicola, had you heard of effective altruism before you
Lit
founded a tech company?
a little bit. I think, like, I mean, what I think the way you described it is fairly accurate, but cynical. I think, like, to me, it's like in the long thread of kind of like philosophical, like, um, Protestant thought, really, where you kind of like go like, and like, how can you do the most good? Should you do the most good? It's kind of like predestination and that stuff, where kind of like, should you behave in a certain way? Does that show your
Yeah.
virtue, etc. All
Yeah.
the way kind of like following the soap opera and, kind of like looking more towards the anthropic types and the whole kind of like, we are the Oppenheimer of like this area. And if we don't behave responsibly, we may unleash upon the world something that will change it forever in a way that we don't like.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's very fair here. I don't think it's really about like AGI per se killing people, but more like you've unleashed a tool that rendered the economy completely ineffective. It gave unbelievable weapons to bad actors or just actors that are not you. So I
Yeah.
think like that's all perfectly valid. I know a little bit about it from like the shallow pond thing, and maybe it's worthwhile if we go through that a little bit just
Yeah.
to kind of set the scene for people. I think it's a perfectly valid um, you know, kind of like philosophy. I think, how you choose to act upon it is really like, um, we'll show whether it was a good thing for the world or not, right?
Yeah. So what's the shallow pond thing? Maybe we can talk a little bit about that for anyone who's not familiar.
Yeah. Okay. So I think like, it's been a while, but I think the main idea is basically if you see a drowning child, right, and like you're wearing an eye suit, like if no one knows, like you should save that child. That's just like universal morality,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's a good thing to do, right? And then like if no one knows that, like you say you're wearing a really expensive suit and you're going to the job interview of your life, and you don't want to ruin the suit and you don't do it. Like if people know or don't know, like am I doing it justice? Kind of like, you should do it regardless. Or like another one was just in the grand scheme of like you are, say, wealthy, right? And you're looking to make the world a better place. It's really about then also being data driven around how you make those decisions. So not just doing like the first thing that comes across your mind that is good, but you kind of like quantify it and make sure that you do the most good possible, right? So, for example, a dollar goes a lot further if you're fighting, like malaria, than if you are solving, I don't know, Christmas presents in the UK, right?
Yeah.
because it creates a warm, fuzzy feeling, but doesn't like actually save anyone's life, right? It just makes them
Yeah.
feel better about themselves. I think the other interesting one was I think this was Peter Singer, one of the philosophers who talked about it. Who, I don't know if he was the one who donated the kidney, because I think the theory was, hey, I could I could donate one of my kidneys, and the risk is like 1 in 40,000 people who get a kidney extracted, it leads to complications, and like they die, or something with their life, right? Goes badly wrong, right? So the argument then, I think it's a really interesting one, probably the most effective one here, is like, hey, do you if you do not choose to donate your kidney right now, if there is someone who needs a kidney, like you're valuing your life at 40,000 times the life of that person, right?
Mm.
I think that's a good example of how like the data driven aspect of effective
Yeah.
altruism almost that's now the cynical part where you kind of said like I'm like judge, jury, and executioner. Like what that side of the coin is, it's almost like kind of like Leninist vanguardism, right? Like a few people in the world will get all the money, right? And maybe these companies that are implementing AI will have all this value accrued to them, right? So if a few of these ultra rich people that become wealthy through doing this, and maybe through not just creating value but moving value from others to themselves, right? Um, are inspired by this ideology, then maybe they can justify the chase
Yeah.
to best possible outcome because, as you said, like they have good intentions, they have like mathematics, and these are smart people, right?
Yeah.
If they have like this ideology, which is also like mathematical about like, I will do better with this money that I'm mostly going to give away anyway, because I think it's fair to say that most of the people in this industrial revolution, and maybe even in prior ones, but maybe that's like a different podcast. Guess for like it wasn't just the money that they're after. They're after like making the world a better place. They're
Sure.
after having impact. They're after legacy. They're after like
Yeah.
this young people to find them. So like if they donate it all away and channel it to the right places, then even if they've destroyed 90% of the world's jobs, maybe it's okay because they'll do
They've
good with
offset it.
it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
QED, we're done, right? Like
Well, it's interesting. You started off, your response with the Protestant sort of angle, and I think with effective altruism, with businesses, with governments, you almost need to talk about it through the lens of religion and like being able to separate church and state. This idea that uh, you know religious people, like religious ideology, has been going down quite a bit, right? And it's been replaced. Um, I forget who said this. There's like a really, really great professor basically said, tech leaders have become like the new Jesus in this country. They've sort of become this new kind of not cult like, but maybe it is cult like, but they've replaced this
you're not
idea.
feeling the eye.
I'm not feeling age, but yes, exactly. You've got this sort of religious, like effigy burning, thing with Suskever and OpenAI, and I think that's all speaking to this idea that tech companies, um, and like the people that are innovating the most, are changing the world the most, have become almost like religious figures, and they need to be guided by these moral principles in the same way that you might have the Ten Commandments. You have this idea of effective altruism and all that comes with it, right? Um, but who are the people that are best set up to do, to do the most good for the most important problems? Generally, I mean, if you're not cynical, it would be your government. And probably the best way to support that, the best form of effective altruism is paying your taxes, which is something that I think a lot of these very large companies don't do. Um, well, let's not even talk about that. I think this idea though that you do need to kind of decouple the
Well, you're right.
cultish.
I think that like the whole premise is that because they're better at allocating those resources, like
Yeah.
they shouldn't even pay tax because they will allocate
Y
those resources in a better
yes.
no, right?
Yes.
Like it's very convenient in addition to
Yes.
kind of sounding okay, right?
Yeah, and if you think about it, if you extend that all the way to AI now, we're also the best to regulate ourselves, the people who are building it. We're the best to sort of say, we think that this is likely to happen, and in order to protect the people from this, we've got, universal base income. We've got a world, Vinod Khosla has talked a lot about this. I heard him on a podcast a few weeks ago, where he said, AI is going to be the gift to the masses, no longer having to work on sort of silly, mundane things anymore. Like we'll be able to sort of spend our free time, playing guitar, playing with our kids, doing things that are much more meaningful. And that's a really kind of positive way to see those types
Mm,
of things. But
yep.
who's responsible for making that, those rules
I
that
mean, I
sort of
mean, I mean,
yeah,
I mean, well, full disclaimer to the audience, is one of our investors. And far from me calling him a Marxist with this, because I think he couldn't be further from that. But the idea is not new. Like Marxism
yeah,
was about like, once we have more productive means of production, right, and we distribute it effectively, we'll create like, a world of infinite. I'm kind of translating from Serbia here from old books that used to be mandatory reading in schools, not for my generation, just before. But like you would have like a world of abundance, and then no one would have to work, and we'd all just discuss philosophy, right? The other pointer I think to the audience, if you again want a more cynical worldview, is Yanis Varoufakis, the legendary Greek minister of finance. He talks about techno feudalism, right, and how
mhm,
basically, we've gone rather, I think this guy is, well, I mean, I don't know where he stands on the political spectrum, but, um, he'd probably be closer to a communist than to a capitalist. Like, he has gone full circle where at this point he's longing for good old capitalism because he thinks that in this accumulation of power through mostly cloud providers and large tech companies, she thinks that we're moving towards a more feudal kind of like society where,
yeah,
we're all serfs, right? Because, and, I think a former CRO of ours, Rich Neeson, uh, jokingly once kind of explained to me, like, these days you're selling software, like, who's your cloud provider? What are the integrations? Who do we need to partner with? Who needs a cut? Who's your telephony provider, right? I think, it used to be the case that, you could benefit from the software. We'll implement it. We'll bring it to you on a CD. You'll
mhm,
pay for it. We'll go have dinner, celebrate, and, call us next year when you need something else, right? These days, really, like, they are getting deeper and deeper into the value chain of everything.
yep,
And, to whom the value of AI accrues, there are many good posts, but I think this was an recent one where they kind of like just analyzed like, will it accrue to the cloud? Will it accrue to the one and only NVIDIA? Can it stay in the application layer? Again, I'm kind of like going away from effective altruism, but in terms of who should govern it, I don't really know. But like
yeah,
what Vinod would tell you, since you mentioned him, is that, like you need a few companies that are ahead of it and that it shouldn't be shared publicly so that there's at least somebody that kind of like keeps, well, your side of the world, right? In this kind of like protocol war that we're in, um, ahead of like adversaries, right? So there's like a bit of that like capitalist thing where it's just like make as much progress as possible with relatively sane people guiding it, right? So if it's a Manhattan project, make sure, there is some governance structure. I think we saw the one for the modern, um, nuclear era. Well, we've seen the structure shake tremendously. I think it looks better now, but then again, like I don't really have an answer. What do you think?
yeah. I don't have an answer either. I mean, we were talking about this before, but like that, governing mission of OpenAI, the nonprofit of ensuring that AI is broadly beneficial for humanity. Like, really, who's responsible for that? I don't think I have a good answer either. I think I agree with what you're saying, which is that as long as you have good actors, sensitive actors that are building toward this, um, at a pace, that satisfies sort of like the pace of change that would probably happen anyway if a bad actor kind of was also building AI. Um, but that then regulation sort of comes later. And so, like my feeling on this is almost like we talked a lot about capitalism, and I read a great quote which said that capitalism was the first uncontrolled artificial intelligence. So yes, capitalism didn't come out of a business, but once it kind of took over as a form of economy, economic government, you saw it do things that I think were unexpected, and you saw it sort of snowball in some areas and have impacts on people. And you know, we talk about wealth inequality all the time in this country, like as a function of capitalism,
Yeah.
for better and for worse. It came with a lot. And there's a lot, of course, that I don't know about, to be able to talk to the nuance of what it means to have capitalism be an artificial intelligence. But it then got these layers of control. I mean, just even look at the interest rate and what the Fed's done in the last year. It's got these layers of control on top of it, and the government's sort of catching up, trying to look ahead, trying to put regulations in place to sort of keep it from doing the most damage to the most people. And so I think I agree with that. I think, just to talk a little bit about the nonprofit for profit, issue as well. It's really hard to ask a business leader. Like, I think it would be really hard for us to ask you, for example, as the leader of this business, to kind of split in half and spend half of your time thinking about innovating as fast as humanly possible, um, so that so that we're a successful company at the same time that we're asking you to keep it as safe as possible. That's a very tough ask. I think people
Yeah,
balance it with things like effective altruism, but
yeah. I mean,
it's hard.
you know, if you listen to like Elon talk about regulators, he's like, I like regulators. I agree with 97% of the things that like they're
Yeah,
imposing on them. Just way of life and like how it should be done. And I think like with AI, again, like because we love the cynical view, you could say that like regulation is there just to help like the people who are not ahead,
yeah,
like
yeah.
slow
Flip
down.
the brakes.
Who
Yeah.
knows? Would slow down OpenAI so GCP can catch up, right? And like so that Google can have like competitive products, right? I think no one was rubbing their hands more while the OpenAI thing was unfolding that they were, right? I mean, people obsess over Microsoft when Microsoft already has like the golden goose, right? So
Oh yeah.
Satya Nadella was just like trying to keep any of the many status quos that were possible there to keep progress going and keeping that good thing going, right?
Yeah.
I think like one thing, like you're right, like capitalism as an AI, or really like it's just Darwinian, it's evolution. So now that like the genie's out of the box, like people will do it, right? People everywhere will do it, and they need it. They need more resources. Where like the layers of commoditization will stop, where there might not be like physical ROI and a bigger model that does all these things. Like we're interpolating, and we're excited, and some people are a bit afraid. So like you imagine an AI that can create like pathogens that can exterminate like entire continents or stuff like that. That may not be around the corner. Like AGI being around the corner. I mean, I was sitting um with Sean and Eddie last night, my co-founders, right? And I generated an image of a piglet waving the Serbian flag being chased by a fork that had the Taiwanese tune on it, while the sky was raining sushi and pork scratchings. And it looked amazing, which probably meditated, right? And I'm like, am I AGI? Right? Because like I can't draw to save my life. I can't draw, right? With this thing, I was sitting in a restaurant and I generated this thing with a few iterations. So it's like, okay, like we might be there already. We don't know what it means, how effective it is, will it like disrupt us? So I think like a lot of this like philosophical like ideology, that's probably like it goes into politics over time and it finds what those
Yeah.
governments to like rein us in if we become too powerful or if the world doesn't look the way most people like it. Um it's really interesting. I mean, I I'm with you. Right? I think like the government needs to catch up and then like do the right thing. I was listening to John Major interview, and he was like the former British, and he was explaining how like he had to raise interest rates. Inflation was down for years, pretty much all the way up until now from the 80s in the UK. And it's like, yeah, well, I mean, I probably lost an election, but
Yeah.
that's a good thing. And if there's like a similar thing with AI where we want to avoid Yanis Varoufakis' techno feudalism, with like, Microsoft and Google ruling everything because those means of production are now the most valuable ones. I don't know, but this is like a thing that we've seen in history. Like how is Sam Altman different from like a Dale Carnegie, right, or someone?
Yeah. 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 I mean, hopefully. Well, actually, yeah, that's a good question. I don't think Carnegie was an effective altruist by any means, whereas Sam Altman was. Like he was, you know, all the profit in the world. Like, give me every dollar I can possibly squeeze out of this company, but I'll give it to charity. That was sort of the name under which he operated, and he defrauded and hurt people. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was under this sort of like umbrella of effective altruism. So I wonder about that sometimes. It's like, is sometimes maybe on in that sort of scale of Sam's, discussion, like maybe um, for Sam Bankman-Fried, it was a way for him to kind of hide in plain sight. It was a way for him to sort of be successful without anybody, being too concerned about him being. Whereas, you have a Bernie Madoff, and that's going to raise a lot of eyebrows and concern a lot of people because it's just in the name of money. But for him, he had this effective altruism sort of like coat of arms right on top. Whereas Sam Altman, I think he's seen. I'm not sure. Maybe he's not. But at least from what I can tell, and the media sentiment about him, he's like good guy AI, right? Like he was the friendly face of
I
AI.
I think he comes across extremely genuine, and I think he's like
Yeah,
really. I'm happy it's Sam Altman at the head of that company and not like pretty much anyone else, right? I think the guy
yeah,
has high integrity. He when it comes to just the pure conflicts of interest and stuff, the guy's like I think a billionaire a few times over. So hopefully, being you know sent a billionaire, how do you say? I don't like I don't think that like being the richest man in the world is a motivator for him. So I think like like it's not a bad like it's not a bad staffing decision.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, it's very possible too that this idea of effective altruism, which I think is at the heart of what we're talking about too, it's just like good people at the helm, innovating empathetically and who are sensitive to the impact that what they're building is going to have on people. Like maybe that is the best form of regulation we have now for AI. And I actually believe that this is true for a lot of companies directly in our space. We are selling um, to enterprise companies with a lot at stake. I mean, if you get what we do wrong, it has a massive brand impact. It has a massive share price impact, but like, forget about that. It has downstream impacts on real people.
Yeah.
And so getting it right is extremely important. And our customers are kind of helping us regulate in that sense, because if something's wrong, they're going to let us know. We're going to feel that pressure, and we're going to course correct.
For
Um,
for for sure. I mean, you look at like, and they're often ahead of regulation, right? So I'll tell you that, most of our banking clients prefer to actually communicate that um, the voice assistant is a voice assistant before the
yep,
conversation starts. Um,
yep,
to the best of my knowledge, and we do quite a lot of work on it, that's not legally mandated in the US, in the
yeah,
UK, in the EU. But people kind of like go further because like they imagine what good regulation should look like in this case,
yep,
right? So I think like people will over try to do the right thing, and like it's the brand impact, but also like just like they think of their consumers and how they would want to be treated as consumers. So
yep.
the world's full of good people. I think it's just it's hard to know what to do in some of these situations.
Yeah. Yeah. But then for a company who's not, whose user, I guess, is a little more passive, or they're not able to see kind of the damage that might happen if the product is bad. So let's pretend for a second that OpenAI is a bad company, and I don't think it is, just for the record. But let's pretend that you use ChatGPT and it became one of the fastest growing kind of like user bases ever. Um, I think it kinda is. I think Threads maybe usurped it, a little bit, get in their speed to get to 100 million users, but anyway, um, but let's say that ChatGPT, the purpose of it was really to scrape your data and, I don't know, somehow defraud you, um, get your Social Security number and, like, yeah, open a bunch of credit cards in your name. Like, let's just pretend like that was the purpose. Um People wouldn't know that the same way that a buyer of enterprise technology, would, because they're already thinking ahead. They're already thinking like, especially banks that you mentioned, like they've been heavily regulated. So they know what's coming around the corner, and they know that they already need to start thinking about these types of things now. So I guess the question is it enough to let your users help regulate you when you're building really, really fast if your user is not educated in self protection the way that an enterprise might be.
I'm definitely not, right? I think when you look at every Ponzi scheme in the history of like, like banking and credits and get rich fast schemes, like, people have, more sophisticated actors with like these products who have been defrauding people over and over again. I think like, um, I mean, like, you have to trust OpenAI that they're not using like your stuff for sharing and stuff. And they're pretty explicit around like what they are using and what they're not. I think like there are good ways of, as you kind of like expose this for use in other applications, which is where I think it really gets problematic. There's like
Yes.
kind of like chain of things that gets forgotten around like where data goes. Can be problematic. And I think today on Twitter I saw a paper, I think it was from Google, finally, where they prompted um, I think GPT-4 or 3.5 into just saying the word open forever, right? And when that right, it starts reproducing some of its training data verbatim, right? People's not getting those stuff like that. Um, Hilarious stuff, right? And like, like these are neural networks with a lot of parameters. Overfitting has always been like the notion of just like
Wow.
remember what you've seen, right? We love LLMs because they mix and match things. There are all these kind of like effects, kind of like where we've effectively, gotten things that work better than, they're able to reason in ways that we didn't expect. But uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's always been possible to kind of like um, recreate. And for example, if you use like a smart keyboard on your mobile phone, right?
Mhm.
My name is Nikola and Michelle, and my postcode is, I bet you that like I think it's Swift. Um, it will tell you what my postcode is and then my phone
Yeah.
number.
Yep.
And like when I'm like, hey, email me at, I want that to autocomplete, right?
Totally.
It's just been trained on my data. So anything trained on stuff like this could be used potentially in a bad way. And
Yeah.
sanitizing it is where I don't think there's malice here as much as like it's just like really hard to reliably like remove that from all training data. And especially when you're training with this much data, things slip it and out. And like the veracity of like what is produced and like the cleaning, safeguarding, there's just so much work to do. And that's kind of
It's
like, like, where are we? Is it about to, produce pathogens that kill confidence? Or is it just, maybe accidentally going to leak someone's credit card details? Well,
yeah.
like for us, it's the end of the world if we do that. And that's why we design it in a way we'll never allow this to happen. But like, if ChatGPT can do this, is it really the end of the world? Probably not as get fixed.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? Who knows? Fortunately, we haven't seen that. I mean, open, 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 open. That seems like that's one of the worst cases so far of you know it exposing sort of its weaknesses rather than actually hurting a user.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, I do wonder about one thing with effective altruism. It's something that you said, which is just like, that autocomplete, which is a very convenient feature on your phone. And none of us are personally educated well enough to know, okay, well, could somebody scrape an autocomplete, thing? Could somebody take this somehow? I know you got keyloggers and stuff like that, but are there vulnerabilities that I don't know about that I can protect myself from? Um, Effective altruism, and I think a lot of the doomerism and like all of this fear, it puts a lot of pressure on individuals, and that's been something that I think has been proven to be ineffective for a really long time. I mean, the climate change is one example, but like, yes, we recycle and we do, we make individual choices that might reduce our carbon footprint. But really, it's not individuals that are doing the most damage. It's not individuals that should be responsible for protection. And so
Yeah.
even thinking like, how can I personally, you know, donate, the right organ for the risk benefit, or this ROI analysis, that's been sort of done by these effective altruist mathematicians somewhere. It's really more about how can we set up systematic ways, to protect humanity. And I think that that's for me like the biggest question for AI regulation is really who's responsible. It can't be Sam Altman, right? It can't be Nikola Murcic. It can't be individual people. It's gotta be something bigger. And
The UN Safety Council is very effective. They agrees on everything. So it's
that's a consensus all day, all the time.
yeah,
Awesome.
cool.
I think we are at time, but this has been super, super interesting. I think
I
talking
think
about
really hard to accuse us of just talking about, enterprise readiness and things do well by our kind of like lead generation. So kind of like looking to just like also provide a bit of lighthearted entertainment and just like general information too. our audience.
Exactly, exactly. We aim to please. Awesome. So we will meet next week, and who knows what we'll be talking about? Maybe religion and tech, maybe changing the world through AI. I don't know, but we'll see you
Or
all.
restart compliance. Who knows? Okay. Thank you,
Awesome.
Michelle.
Thanks, Nicola.